Denial of evolution is unique to the United States. I mean, we are the world's most advanced technological, so I mean, you could say Japan, but generally the United States is where most of the innovation still happens. People still move to the United States.
This statement is in direct opposition between things compared. Why would you tell everyone information that contradicts the point itself? Did you know that 93% of the Declaration of Independence signers were Christians? The Ten Commandments are still engraved in marble behind the seat of the Chief Justice just to remind the American people of our historical roots. 95% of the U.S. Constitution authors were also Christians. Wouldn't this have the complete opposite effect if denial of evolution was really having an impact on a person's intelligence or credibility in America? The real question is, why is the theory or worldview being state-enforced when only 15% of the population are anti-God? Mary Elaine Swanson said, according to Professor Lawrence A. Kremen, the Bible was the single most primary source for the intellectual history of colonial America. From their knowledge of the Bible, a highly literate, creative people emerged. David J. Brewer said, the American nation from its first settlement at Jamestown to this hour is based upon and permeated by the principles of the Bible. I think any honest person would agree that belief in God has no negative effect on a person's decision-making skills, nor his intellect. It didn't stop George Washington from becoming the first president of the United States, did it?
And that's largely because of the intellectual capital we have, the general understanding of science.
The general understanding that the odds against a spark of life igniting accidentally on Earth are 10 to the power of 40,000. The general understanding of the second law of thermodynamics. The general understanding that proteins cannot form without DNA, but neither can DNA form without proteins. The general understanding of the odds against life beginning spontaneously anywhere in space is 10 to the improbable power of 30.
When you have a portion of the population that doesn't believe in that, it holds everybody back, really.
As if we are keeping you locked out of your lab, preventing you from conducting scientific studies? Or could it be because your theory can't hold up under careful critique and we are exposing it to the world? Perhaps Mr. Nye has a different concept of science than I do. For example, Richard Dawkins said that was no metaphor. I believe it is the literal truth, provided certain keywords are defined in the particular ways favored by biologists, but a metaphor does not cease to be a metaphor simply because one defines a word to mean something other than its normal meaning. Indeed, it is the function of metaphor to do precisely this. The fallacy of equivocation, when someone switches the meaning of a word. According to noted philosopher of science Carl Gustav Hempel, inadequate empirical interpretation turns a theoretical system into a testable theory. The hypotheses whose constituent terms have been interpreted become capable of test by reference to observable phenomena. Frequently the interpreted hypothesis will be derivative hypotheses of the theory. But their confirmation or disconfirmation by empirical data will then immediately strengthen or weaken also the primitive hypotheses from which they were derived.
Evolution is the fundamental idea in all of life science, in all of biology.
So Nye just admitted to the world that his theory is the fundamental idea to all of life science and all of biology. In other words, any time he examines something in those areas, his interpretation will be based on his preconceived notion that evolution is scientific. For example, everything that we see must be explained as a result of natural processes. He lets his worldview determine his interpretations. We must examine the evidence before coming to a conclusion because the evidence might rule out the possibility of any false interpretations or distinguished flaws within the theory itself. All too often education indoctrinates those in its care in a certain worldview. In our age of almost worship of the science establishment, it is quite possible that a more accurate view of reality will be dismissed simply because it does not conform to some body of scientific opinion or worldview. In universities, quote, the religious people keep their mouths shut, and the irreligious people discriminate.
It's very much analogous to trying to do geology without believing in tectonic plates.
We can observe tectonic plates. However, we can't observe evolution, only variation and genetic adaptation. Some call this microevolution, even though we already have a word to explain variation. Phenotypic plasticity is the ability of an organism to change its phenotype in response to changes in the environment. In other words, adaptation. An adjustment modified to fit a changed environment. However, it's a system with limits, confined by the laws of our DNA.
You're just not going to get the right answer. Your whole world is just going to be a mystery instead of an exciting place.
I beg to differ. We have an entire book explaining our world, origin, and other mysteries that science could not explain until recently. Although the Bible is obviously not a science textbook, otherwise it would be continuously out of date, the Bible does contain all the basic principles upon which true science is built. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, all scripture is given by inspiration of God, and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. The Bible abounds with references to nature and natural processes, and thus frequently touches on the various sciences. For instance, there are many passages that deal with principles of hydrology, geology, astronomy, meteorology, biology, physics, cosmology, and the grand principles of the space mass energy time continuum. Just as the Bible has become a source book for history and archaeology, so it is also a source book for the foundational principles of science. Those who ignore the information of Scripture will be ever learning, and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 7. Dr. Russ Humphrey successfully predicted the magnetic fields of Uranus and Neptune based on biblical creation in their age of about 6,000 years. The deep-time universe predictions were wrong. However, that comment would describe your world view to a T. There's nothing more mysteries than matter emerging from nothingness.
As my old professor Carl Sagan said, when you're in love, you want to tell the world. So,
Being in love is dangerous because you talk yourself into thinking you've never had it so good. David Sowell. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. So that they are without excuse, because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Romans 1:20-21.
once in a while I get people that really, or that claim they don't believe in evolution.
They claim. I assume he is implying that these people aren't telling the truth?
And my response generally is, why not? Really, why not?
Could it be because of the lack of evidence? Or because all documented mutations lose genetic information and slowly degrade life? How about magnetic field decay? The inverse square law, the force of attraction between two objects is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. If the distance is 1/3, the force of attraction between two objects is 9 times greater. Since the intensity of the Earth's magnetic pole was stronger in the past, we only have a limited amount of time to work with. At some point the magnetic field would have extracted the iron out of the blood within our bodies.